So, hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Default Global. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs and remote work experts from all around the world to share their experiences on global hiring and on remote work. And our guest today is JC Chambers, founder and CEO at Workforce, right? JC, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Great to be here, Vit.
Absolutely. So, yeah, we're excited to have you here. And so, Jesse, you're the founder and CEO of Workforce, a media company that is focused on educating people about the future work. And I know that you're passionate about like remote work. You're helping people find remote jobs. So, could you tell us more about your personal journey in building your existing company?
Sure. Workforce, and I always have to get in that we founded Workforce before the pandemic.
Okay.
We were believers before it became hip. But
Okay.
Workforce is the first and only digital media company dedicated to remote work. We think of our audience as people who work remotely or want to, and the businesses that employ them. Our goal is to help people design their careers around their lives, not vice versa. And my journey to founding Workforce is really sort of I think a funny story. So basically, I lived, most of my adult life and career in San Francisco. I was an
Hmm.
executive at a bunch of different tech and media companies,
Hmm.
and I sort of realized or became a remote worker without knowing it. So I was based in San Francisco. My bosses were in places like, Denver and New York. My company was based in New York. I was traveling, for client meetings and conferences and back to headquarters at least 1 week per month. And so when I was in San Francisco, if I needed to be in the office, I could be in the office. If I needed to work from my home office, I was empowered and trusted to do so. In other words, I was sort of treated like an adult. And so when it came time for me to think about changing companies or changing careers, I sat back and I did an exercise where I said, what are the 5 things that are most important to me, regardless of the company or the job title or these kinds of things. And it's silly to say, but it was only by doing that exercise that I realized I was a remote worker and that I didn't want to give up that kind of flexibility that I had enjoyed, and I felt like made me better at my job and more successful in my companies at whatever I would want to do. And so, armed with that sort of knowledge, I went out and tried to find either other companies that were working that way or places where I could find information about how to work that way. And there really wasn't anything out there. And I was really frustrated for about 30 seconds. And then I said, wait a minute, a thing or two about building companies and building media brands. If you wish that this existed, maybe other people would too. And so that's how I sort of, came up with the nucleus of what ended up becoming Workforce.
Hmm. 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 Okay. Okay. Sounds good. And let's talk a bit about the current situation, right? That we can see on the market. So there are a bunch of like a big guys, big companies who are pushing employees back to the office, right? So, but there are a bunch of remote workers who simply cannot return due to personal reasons, and they may feel kind of unsupported and unprotected currently because there are no ways how you can protect yourself from legal point of view, right? Being a remote worker. So with that, let's start with just really hard question, I guess. What advice would you give these remote workers who want to continue working remotely and feel that their company isn't kind of addressing their concerns?
Yeah, I think first of all, in the macro, I think this we needed to sort of expect this, right? Like the pendulum swung really unexpectedly to the remote and distributed side because of the pandemic. And so, now the pendulum is swinging back the other direction. I think in the macro, the cat is out of the bag, the genie is out of the bottle. Like once people have seen that they can be as productive, if not more productive, working in a flexible way, if not fully remote, there's going to be a lot of resistance to giving up that flexibility. And so, what I would say to employees who are not feeling supported by their companies is number one, like you're not alone. Any leader who tells you that they have this figured out and that they know we're going to be flexible, or we're going to be in office, or this is how remote is going to work, is lying, because everybody's figuring it out in real time, and learning how to make it work. The second thing that I would say to employees is, recognize that you have a lot of power in the situation. I understand that, with the global economy, the situation is different. We've seen a lot of layoffs, but I think that the companies that you see that are really making noise and pushing a lot about, back to office, like I saw an article today about Google. And Salesforce is trying to incentivize people to return to office by making contributions to charities. Like, they're really trying to do anything that they can, the carrot and the stick, right? And you know, uh, it, those kinds of marquee companies, your Googles, your Amazons, your Salesforce, if they're having trouble getting people to come back to the office, then the companies that do not have those marquee names are going to have to offer the kind of flexibility that employees want if they hope to attract and retain top talent. So I think that the employees and the talent still have a lot of power. And they may be feeling pushback from leadership, but I think they should feel empowered to push right back and say, hey, you've given us mixed messages. What you told me 18 months ago, that I could work from anywhere forever, and now you're telling me to come back to the office. I bought this house. What do you what do you want me to do? You know what I mean? Like the mixed messages. Employees, I
Yeah.
think, can be forgiven if their heads are spinning.
Yeah. And considering this kind of I guess transition we're witnessing, like currently, do you think that companies may end up making different hiring choices about people than they otherwise make, like might have like a year ago, right? When remote work was still kind of trend. But currently, they might think, those hiring managers might think, okay, so remote work may not kind of exist next year, so I don't need like guys with like those skills, right? So, do you think that there will be some changes like that?
I think if managers or leaders think that remote work is not going to exist in a year, I have some data I can show them. Yeah, I mean, are they going to make different hiring decisions? I think perhaps. I think that uh, the reality is that the managers and leaders, the folks who aren't in the C-suite, are suffering from, I think, the same lack of clarity and lack of understanding. Might be suffering from some of the same lack in clarity and understanding that the employees are, because, like I said earlier, the folks in the C-suite um, don't know. They don't have it figured out. They're trying what they can try to cajole and force people back into the office because they think that might be what they want. If they don't get what they want, they may be trying something different, in 12 months. And so I think that in the macro, if you step back, I love the Bill Gates quote that people often overestimate the amount of change that can take place in a year, but underestimate the amount of change that will take place in a decade. And I think if you zoom out and you think not about the next 3 months or 6 months, but you think about the next 3 years, we're going to trend more flexible. And I think that managers and leaders who they should be focused on what is the best employee, what is the best talent that I can bring into this position, and they should not be focused on the zip code that employee lives in. They should be trying to bring in the best and most talented people they can get for a position, whether that's in the same state, in the same country, in the same time zone, whatever that is. I think long term talent wins, and they should be focused more on how they can attract the best talent, not where that talent lives.
Okay. And speaking about flexibility, do you think currently it is a really strong pitch point for companies who are competing for top talent, maybe on the global talent market level? Do you think it's still kind of very strong pitch point?
I think it's table stakes. I think that for top talent in any role,
Hmm.
they're going to expect some level of flexibility, right?
Hmm.
And so I always like to make the point too that I think of flexibility as I my hackles come up when people talk about it as a perk. I think it's a benefit, right? It's a
Hmm.
benefit the same way, companies offer, medical benefits and paid time off. And so I think that, the kinds of employees that companies want to attract are simply going to demand that benefit of flexibility. And that's crucially not to say, I think it's important when we talk about remote work to not talk about, the meme of the person on with a laptop on the beach in Fiji.
Hmm.
Flexibility means a lot of things. It means working from a home office. It might mean working from, an office a few days a week or a few days a month. It might be working from, shared workspace or, any kind of thing like that. So I think, flexibility is the term, not necessarily 100% distributed remote work.
Hmm.
I also think that, certainly face-to-face time and team building, in person is really, really crucial. And the more that companies can invest in that in intelligent, intentional ways. So not simply saying, "Hey, you need to be in the office 3 days per week." Um, why? Like, do you have 3 days of team meetings or team building experiences?
Hmm.
Because that's a
Hmm.
reason.
Hmm.
It's not just making a blanket statement with a
Hmm.
number.
Yeah.
Applying that across a 10,000 person company.
Hmm. Hmm. But let's take a look from some other side of on this, right? So, in your opinion, what are the maybe obstacles that companies might face when offering flexibility? There are global employees, right, who are just based in some other countries, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, right? So, ironically, the technical limitations aren't as challenging as some of the bureaucratic limitations, right? So
Hmm.
a small company, it's easier for a large company, thousands of people, to hire in different states or in different countries because they have the legal infrastructure and apparatus to onboard somebody who lives in Ireland or
Right,
in Argentina.
right.
It's less easy to do for smaller companies who are just getting started to do that. And so I think what you're already seeing is companies who are offering sort of HR based solutions for companies, smaller companies like that, to streamline that onboarding and the legal and bureaucratic processes to make that easier for people to do. Um, I think another thing that's really challenging is, um, what does that do for your company culture? How do you intentionally build a company culture in a fully distributed environment when you have different people in different locations in different countries? I think that you have to be really intentional about that in a way that maybe you don't need to be if you were building a company in the 1980s in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and you had, an office with, 30 or 40 people in an office. The culture would sort of evolve a little bit more organically. So that's sort of the bad news. It's like it's harder. You have to be more intentional about it. The good news is that when you are more intentional about it, you can foster the kinds of culture and the kinds of behaviors that you really value, and that will make it, longer lasting, a better place to work. So, the bad news is that it's a little bit more work up front. The good news is that, like anything else, when you put in a little bit more work up front, you get better results longer term.
Yeah, and let's talk maybe a bit about the motivation for those companies um, who are still kind of hiring remotely, hiring globally, right? And just small observation from my side, as I run talent acquisition company that helps like find talents globally in Latam, Eastern Europe. On what I have seen last year, the main reason for companies to go kind of global was talent shortage in the US, right? But this year, things have shifted. So now companies are primarily looking to save money to cut their cost. They're cutting costs on salaries, insurance, tax, office spaces, and so on. So basically, at this point, from what I see, that's the main reason this pushing power, to go global, to hire remotely. And that leads me to a question: what's your take on this? Do you see that this cost saving is a major reason why remote work is still kind of trend in some niche, right, between some size of companies, or there are some other reasons?
Um, I think both things can be true, and I think not to go back to my pendulum analogy, but I think that uh, you know the macroeconomic conditions have a lot to do with the motivations of companies who are doing that, right? So,
Right.
if a couple of years ago the macroeconomic conditions were, let's throw more fuel on the fire. How do we get more talent? Then that might be a little bit more of a motivation to bring in people in that case. And then now companies in the U.S. at least are, and globally are trying to maybe not cut corners, but be more efficient, right? Be more
Right.
efficient with their spend, and tighten the purse strings a little bit. That might be a motivation as well. I think that in general, to zoom back out, ultimately, I think that the shift to remote work is going to do a lot more for globalization of talent and globalization of industry.
Hmm.
So it's going to come down eventually to who is the best person for this role, regardless of their background or location. And talent's going to win. And so where is the best most efficient thing we can do? I think the companies who are in startup mode or trying to be really efficient are realizing that they can get a lot of the same equal talent or better talent in other places, and it might be
Hmm.
easier to hire them or onboard them, or more efficient in terms of cost savings, and that's not a bad thing, as long as companies are being responsible with how they're paying those employees, right? So I think it's appropriate to look at economic conditions, whether it's state by state. So companies now have buckets and say, this is the base salary that we're offering if you live in the U.S., in California or New York.
Hmm.
This is the base salary if you live in a different bucket. That's responsible and transparent. It becomes, I think, problematic when you have companies that might be doing virtual assistant offshoring for 50 cents an hour to somebody in another part of the world. That gets starts to reek of exploitation, which is not what we want to do. And so I think that we want to be transparent, and upfront. But again, talent is talent, and if people are qualified to do a job, more power to them, and we should bring in the best people we can.
Yeah, that's true. And so you're a recognized expert in the remote workspace, right? So, and there are a bunch of things that are going on in this area. So, how do you stay updated with the latest trends and developments in global hiring in remote workspace? And what maybe specific resources do you recommend for entrepreneurs who are new to this global hiring and who are trying to expand globally? Maybe some advice.
Yeah, well, so it's a little self-serving, but I would say people should read Workforce. So, we're creating content for people who want to work, who work remotely or want to, and the businesses that employ them. So, a lot of our content, in fact, more than like half of our content, is geared toward people who are managers or leaders in their company, about how do you make this work. And then, I like to think of it too that even the content that's not geared towards managerial issues is geared toward remote work, and managers when they're not being managers are people too, and so they need to think about how to do things like how to create boundaries with colleagues and with yourself and at home. But one of the things that I think is a great resource that we're really proud of is we early on in the pandemic, a lot of the leading remote first, original remote first companies, your GitLabs, your Zapiers, those kinds of folks, when all these other companies started shifting to remote reactively, those companies open source their handbook. So I'm sure that like one of the common best practices of remote first companies is to really diligently document your operations and really everything. And so those companies open source their playbooks, which was great and very generous of them, and I think a useful resource to those companies. The problem was that on average, those playbooks were about 120 to 150 pages. And so it was, something that if anybody who might be struggling, with remote operations would have a tough time digesting, a couple thousand pages worth of playbooks. And so what we did at Workforce was to create playbooks for these different, documents. So what we did is we would take, GitLab's 150 page remote work playbook, and we would create, a 1,500 word document that sort of, boils it down. It's like Cliff's Notes for remote operations. And so I think that that's a great place to start. Because you learn sort of, the best practices. We also created digests. So we created a few different articles that talk about specifically like hiring and onboarding and culture and tools and communications. To create sort of super summaries for all those things. So that's a really easy way for people in a short amount of time to learn a lot about what the native remote companies, the best native remote companies in the world, are doing to operate successfully in a remote environment.
Yeah, from my experience, uh, as I already told you, I have teams in 10 different countries, and we're also trying to document everything. Right? Do we have tons of guides? And the biggest challenge for my company basically is not to kind of put together that guide, but just to, you know, to to make your team follow that guide, to read that guide, right? So, and just
And to contribute
sometimes,
to that guide too, right?
yeah,
So like
yeah,
that's the real virtuous thing is
right.
when a company can create that kind of thing, and it can foster a culture where, once the ball is rolling, the employees in the company contribute to it and make it better themselves, for themselves and for, their colleagues and for future employees. That's the real, I think, ideal state.
That's true. That's true. Okay, so probably my last question: what are top 3 recommendations for companies who are just starting to exploring? I mean, this global hiring. What 3 pieces of advice can you give to those hiring managers, to those executives, founders who are just newcomer to this space?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is practice acceptance, right? Like truly accept that you and your company are going to be remote forever. Like this is some flavor of it, some percentage of it. Whether your company is flexible. I don't love the term or the effects of hybrid work, but it's something that I think if you really want to compete in the future of work, you need to offer flexibility to your employees. I love to give the example of, it's pretty simple to think about, like, company A and company B. If company A has a little bit better product and they're doing better than company B, but they're forcing their employees back to the office and their employees don't want to go, those employees might start looking for jobs at company B. And over time, company B is going to attract better talent. Better talent is going to produce better work. Eventually, company B, I think, will surpass company A. And so, acceptance around that, and just move forward competing with that. The tactical second piece of advice I would give is tactical, which we just talked about, which is document everything obsessively. One very tactical thing I think we can do is to create a user guide. So I can provide you with a link for this, Vip, but I wrote a piece that got picked up by Fortune. I think it's really useful for leadership and all employees in any environment, but especially in remote environments, to create a user guide for how you work best, how you can communicate with me, the kinds of things that help me be successful, the kinds of things that don't help me be successful. And that can be a great way to sort of hack or short circuit a lot of the things that people would learn over time working with people in a co-located or office environment. So, document everything obsessively. You can create a user guide. But it's more than just like new hire onboarding. Like it really is, as we just said, like creating an environment where you have, all of your practices and all of your documentation in a place that is open source, that all employees can access to consume or access to edit as they see the need to do so. I think that's really something that the best remote first companies do, and is really an ideal state that you can foster as a remote leader. The last thing, it's a simple thing. It's a soundbite. but it's something that I think people really need to understand and appreciate, which is to measure output, not input. And so what I mean by that is, identify, hire, promote, and retain the best talent, regardless of their location. And the best talent are the people who are producing outcomes. So, they're the ones who are, achieving their OKRs and, exceeding expectations and moving the needle in a numbers space. It's not the person who you look across the office and who's, staring at their computer screen, typing really fast, and you say, wow, that they look really busy. They must be really doing a good job. That's not measuring output. That's measuring an input based on what you see with your eyes. And I think, frankly, that a lot of the companies that are struggling right now and trying to push people and cajole and force people back to the office may have not figured out a way how to measure output as effectively as they can measure input, and so they feel more comfortable as leadership if they can do things like measuring, the number of days that people are on site. The article that I mentioned briefly earlier that I saw today said that, Google is now going to try to force people back to the office by saying that their on-site attendance may be a factor in their performance reviews, which is sort of like loose language. I think it's interesting that they're not coming down too hard on it. But what does that mean? I think that's a hard thing to measure, a hard thing to really justify. And I think the companies that have that kind of broad stroke, come to the office 3 days a week and will like you better, not having anything to do with the quality of your work, are going to have a hard time retaining talent over time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I guess we're good. I guess we're good. So thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for sharing your insights. And we wish you and workforce all the best in your journey. Thanks a lot.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, and congratulations on what you're doing and what you're building. I really love the podcast, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
Thanks a lot.